chair of the session is award-winning novelist and short story writer Rachael King, who was until recently the literary director of Word, the Christchurch Writers' Festival. So we're delighted to have you here in Marlborough, Rachael, and you'll talk with Paula Morris. So thank you very much.
Kia ora. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Well, as you heard, my name is Rachael King, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here to this Marlborough Book Festival session, an hour with Paula Morris. Really, it should be 2 hours because Paula's led such an interesting life, so we're going to be cramming stuff in. I just want to say a huge thank you to the festival team and their sponsors, including Dog Point, because having run a festival myself, I know how important sponsors are, and I really have to say I love this festival, and all of my writer friends, I say if you ever get invited, for goodness sake, go, because it's such a wonderful experience, and I think, yeah, you guys are really lucky to have such a beautiful, beautiful festival. I first met Paula 21 years ago when we were both attending the MA in Creative Writing at the newly named IIML at Victoria University, and it was under the auspicious tutelage of Bill Manhire. Paula immediately marked herself out as the biggest swot in the room with a huge talent and knowledge about what creative writing is and can be. We taught each other in those days. Bill gently steered the conversation rather than lecturing us. And Paula went on, unsurprisingly, to win the Adam Prize that year for the best folio. And it was no small feat when you consider that others in the class included writers such as Booker long-listed Anna Smale and Carl Schucker. So Queen of Beauty, the novel that we helped her to write, went on to win the best first book of fiction at the Montana New Zealand Book Awards, and the rest, as they say, is history. Now, I won't give you that history in potted form like you often get in these introductions, otherwise we'll be here for the whole hour just on that. So I'll just say that she's written numerous novels and short stories, essays short and long, and has picked up many accolades along the way. Because that's what we're here to talk about, Paula Morris's extraordinary career and her contribution to Aotearoa's literary scene. We're going to start in 2001, because any earlier would be a travesty of time management. And we'll move through to today. And we'll chat for about 45 or 50 minutes, and then there'll be the opportunity to for you to ask questions at the end. So first, can we please have a big paki paki to welcome Paula Morris.
Kia ora, Rachel. You're looking quite like Kate Bush today, I must say.
I'll just start wafting around Heathcliff. Now, this is quite nerve-wracking for me because I'm chairing the best chair in New Zealand. Paula's husband, Tom, is going to hold up scorecards, apparently, throughout the session to tell me how I'm doing. But Paula's chaired people like Nigella Lawson, Karl Ove Knuskott.
George Saunders.
Who?
George Saunders.
George Saunders, yes. Booker Prize winners, Pulitzer Prize winners, probably.
Kazuo Ishiguro in the UK. I did him there. That was really great.
What was that?
Kazuo Ishiguro when I lived in the UK.
Oh, amazing. Yes, there you go. So anyway, no pressure. But my first question is, Paula, can we go back to 2001? And I just want to know what made you decide to leave your quite glamorous life in America in marketing for record companies to come back to New Zealand and study creative writing?
So the answer is I met Bill Manhire. He was visiting New York, and I interviewed him for the Herald, I think. And he told me about his MA course that he had just started. It was really brand new. And I thought that sounds really good, and it would be good to get away from New York, where it was just incessantly about working and earning money, and have a year in Wellington where I earned no money and almost froze to death. And so I applied, and Tom and I just got married, and I said, I've applied for this thing, but I probably won't get in. And of course I did. Mm. So within a few months of us getting married, I said, we'll just go to Wellington for a year. But then we never did go back to live in New York. We went on our gypsy life, living in many different places. And my husband is still very resentful about it. So it is really Bill Manhire's fault.
So did you think that you would just have this year and then go back to your life in marketing, or did you see this as the first step in a kind of a literary career?
I'm never very good at seeing forward or planning. or thinking ahead, really. Though in some ways I am, and in other ways I am. But with my own life, I'm very much thinking, what now, what now, what now? And so you have general aspirations about actually finishing a book.
Yeah.
But I really did think we would go back to New York at the end of it. But we ended up going to Iowa City instead for 2 years, and then to New Orleans, and then to Glasgow, and then to Sheffield, and so on.
And that planning, I mean, this is what I remember about you, is that you seemed very methodical. It felt like you'd arrived with your idea, and while the rest of us kind of flailed around, you wrote chapter after chapter after chapter, and you had a plan, and you knew what you were doing, and then by the end of the year, you actually finished the book as well. Is this the way you always approach your books, do you think?
Yeah, I think I do.
Yeah.
I remember Carl kept saying, as the year went on, he was getting desperate. He was like, how many words have you written? How many words have you written? And it's like, it doesn't matter how many words anyone else has written. It matters how many words you've written, and just get on with it.
So he wrote about 150,000.
I know, his book was out of control. But yeah, but I mean, my days were spent, and it was probably only 5 days a week I spent like this, wrapped in a duvet in our really cold house on Adelaide Road. The wind gusted through it and the mice ran amok, and typing.
Don't you feel, we recently had our 20-year anniversary party, and unfortunately Paula was stuck in lockdown in Auckland, so she couldn't come, which was a real shame. But don't you feel sort of some nostalgia for those days where that was your life, you just 1 year, you're just going to go and you're going to wrap yourself in your duvet and you're going to write, and you didn't have to think about anything else? Deeply
nostalgic for them, because my life has not been like that ever since. So no, it was, I mean, we were broke, there's no doubt, and the weather was difficult. Yeah. But not everyone in our course loved me as much as they might have.
I did.
But it was time to spend on writing, which I rarely had since.
Yeah. And of course it was 2001 and 9/11 happened while we were there. How did that affect you at the time?
Well, that was a really traumatic day. You'll all remember it well. And it was very strange to think about the city where I'd lived for some years, and my husband had lived for 20, 25 years, being so irrevocably changed. And at the time we were worried as well, because it seemed like the death of irony and the death of jokes. And I was writing a very silly novel set there called Trendy But Casual, which I'd put aside to write Queen of Beauty, and I thought, I'm never going to be able to write that now. But I was eventually. So obviously I thought of it in selfish terms as my answer to you, in terms of what I was writing.
I remember Bill saying, how do we write through something like this? I mean, from now on, can you ever write a novel that doesn't mention 9/11? And of course the world threw up all kinds of other things that...
Indeed. And now it's COVID. I mean, so many novels I know that are being written set in 2019.
Yeah.
Just to get around it.
Because we just don't know what's going to happen.
No.
Yeah. So your first novel, Queen of Beauty, is set in New Orleans.
And in Auckland as well.
And in Auckland, yes. Where you moved back to after you had stayed in New Zealand for a couple of years. Can you tell us about your time in New Orleans?
Yeah, so I spent 6 years in New Orleans. I taught at Tulane, which is a very expensive private college there. And it was there, in fact, we had so much money that we could invite in Joan Didion, Toni Morrison, Salman Rushdie, and pay them the huge fees they demanded, which was great.
Can you please tell me what Joan Didion was like?
Well, I
don't know anyone who's met Joan Didion.
Joan Didion was very old by this point, and I was in awe of her. And we were having dinner after the event, and she looked over at me and beckoned. I crept up and she said, did you just say, Christmas will always be in my heart? And I said, no, I'm not even talking about Christmas. She said, that's good. So Joan Didion was almost disappointed in me, but it was all right. And then I had to drive her to the airport when she left, and Joan Didion was very frail. I mean, she did have eating issues all her life. She was very frail. And she was wearing these big lace-up boots with sheepskin. So we drive up to New Orleans airport. There were these guys standing around smoking in charge of the wheelchairs. So I beckon one of them over. He brings over the wheelchair and he looks at her. I get her out of the car. She's like a little bird. He said, "Them boots are going to be a problem." So I knelt on the ground in front of Joan Didion and unlaced her boots and took her little bird legs out of them. I thought, I can't break Joan Didion's legs. That would be terrible. So I have actually knelt on the ground in front of Joan Didion.
Which is what everybody should do, really, when you think about it.
No, she was fantastic.
Yeah. And of course you were there when Hurricane Katrina hit. I mean, that's another thing we could talk about for a full hour, and you write about it in your book, False River, but could you just tell us what your experience was like?
Yeah, so Hurricane Katrina, the last day of August of 2005, God, it was so long ago now. So we evacuated on the Sunday with everyone else the day before. I can't talk about this anymore, really, because you've all heard this a million times. When New Orleans went underwater, it wasn't because of the hurricane. It was because of the storm surge and because the levees failed. So it was really a man-made disaster. It was due to neglect over many years by the Army Corps of Engineers. The river levees held, but the lake levees did not. So in this very surreal situation of where you lived being essentially underwater, unable to go back, and we wandered really for about 3 months, I think, mainly in central Louisiana at first. I came back to New Zealand at some point because Hibiscus Coast was coming out, and I came back and did a book launch for it. We still couldn't live in our place. We didn't have electricity for months. We had gas intermittently. Our phone service didn't come back on for 8 months. And the city was in a mess, and still is, really. I mean, and you know about this through Christchurch. You know how long it takes to rebuild.
Yeah, and I was going to say,
disaster.
In False River, you talk about the city being shrill with stories, and because I remember about that in Christchurch as well. Is that any time you saw somebody, the first question you said to someone was, "How's your house?" And you also say no rules seem to apply anymore. The city was a mess. Everyone was a mess.
Oh yeah, because New Orleans is always on the brink of disorder and chaos at the best of times. So things like stop signs and red lights no longer had any meaning. And in fact, I learned in New Orleans, you sit, when the light turns green, you wait. You wait for the people going through the red light.
But that's like Christchurch now.
Really? Is it?
People are terrible with red lights in Christchurch.
Yeah, it's like our laws no longer apply. It was very difficult, the rebuilding time. It was really hard. Yeah. But it's still going on.
Yeah. So after Queen of Beauty, you went and did an MFA at the famous Iowa workshop as well. And so what was the project that you worked on there?
So in Iowa, I workshopped a lot of the short stories that ended up in my first collection, Forbidden Cities, and I also finished Hibiscus Coast, or I almost finished Hibiscus Coast. Everything is a blur to me in my life now. I think I just worked on it a lot, because I don't think I finished Hibiscus Coast till I got the chance to go to Shanghai, because it's partly set in Shanghai. So that's what I worked on. Marilyn Robinson was my thesis supervisor.
Marilyn Robinson.
So she was my teacher, and I won't say what I was going to say because I just remember we're being recorded. And and it was a great experience, and I met some really wonderful friends there who I'm still friends with 20 years later. A group of us women, we were slightly older than others. We called ourselves the Dowagers. And everyone lives in different parts of the US, and then there's me overseas, and we catch up by Zoom once every couple of months, and we have reunions as well.
And one thing about you, Paula, is you're a great facilitator and a great bringer together of people, and I imagine you had some fantastic parties at Iowa as well.
We had some very good parties. So my husband kept adding people to the list of people banned from our house. So I said to him, "You banned my entire class and most of my students, and soon there'll be no one left in Iowa who's allowed to come." But we had some very good parties. It was a difficult time in many ways, again because we were really broke, but it was very intense. Yeah, made some good friendships, wrote a lot actually.
Yeah, and so Hibiscus Coast is an art, sort of an art heist literary thriller. Would that be how you'd kind of explain it? And then after that, you wrote the New York-based comedy Trendy But Casual. Can you tell me what the inspiration for that novel was?
I used to be a publicist. So Once We're Publicists, I think, will be the title of my memoir, when I'm no doubt going to be asked to write one. Yeah. And it's very hard to get away from that. Kirsten McDougall will know about this as well. Once a publicist, always a publicist. And actually for years when I would go to writers' festivals, like the Auckland Festival or other places, and I go into the green room to turn up for my event, and someone would say to me, "So who are you looking after?"
Oh, You just
And I
have
thought,
that look about
I must
you.
have the publicist aroma still. I'd say just myself. I'm going to be in the events.
Anyway, it's very funny. What I loved about that book is because your first two novels were, you know, they were quite serious. And I just know you as one of the funniest people I know. And so what I loved about that book is that I got to hear your humour. If you, find it if you can. It's a really, really funny read. I really loved it. It's a very Paula novel, yeah.
It's just a very silly book, but about being a publicist in New York. And
it was your chicklet moment.
Yes, I suppose so.
So just trying to be provocative there. So was it when you were researching Hibiscus Coast that you got the idea for Rangatira?
Yeah, so part of the story of Hibiscus Coast is that a Goldie painting is stolen. It's taken out of the Auckland Museum for cleaning. And in fact, while it's out of the premises, it's copied. And that was based on a conversation I had with a conservator at the Auckland City Art Gallery who said lots of really good copying was coming out of China, and it was often very difficult to tell a good copy from an original. So that was sort of the notion there. And while doing research at the museum library and into Goldie, I picked up the Lindauer book, edited by James Cowan, Pictures of Old New Zealand, and found in there the portrait of Paratene Te Manu, tupuna of mine, and a little oral history of his life, and those were the seeds for Rangatira, which of course was not published till 10 years later.
Which went on to win the, was it the Dirts Medal then at the Montana Book Awards?
Just the Montana. No, it was the New Zealand Post Awards by then.
Okay. I can't keep up.
No.
So it won the highest accolade for fiction that year. Can you just, because you said he was...
Before you ask your question, Rachel, I've got to tell you something my mother said that night. My mother was too ill then to come with us to the ceremony, so my father and brother came, my sister and brother-in-law, and before I left home, my mother said to me this really wonderful thing. She said, even if you don't win, we'll all secretly know you were really the best.
Oh,
which was a really good thing for my mother to say. And really, I think it was probably the best thing she ever said. But anyway, it was really, really a great thing. But she was just sort of setting me up possibly for failure, because it is really hard. I mean, all writers know, or anyone who's ever up for any sort of award knows, you can't help but get your hopes up.
Yeah.
And
Well, I once won an award for being the best magazine sales rep at the New Zealand Magazine Awards, and my father said, "Oh well, it's not a book award, but well done anyway." Can you tell us? So it was based on your ancestry. Could you just tell us a bit about your tūranga waiwai?
Okay, so I'm from. My people are from north of Auckland, so mostly from Pakari and Lee. Are people familiar at all with that area? Pakari, Lee, Little Barrier, Great Barrier, all that area. But also on one side of the family, on the Ngāti side of the family, from Tutakaka and Nungaru. That's on my great-grandmother's side. So that whole stretch of coast and islands is tūranga waiwai, really. Yeah.
And the book's about to be published in Te Reo Māori as well.
Yes.
Can you tell us what that process has been like?
Weird. So, there's this Ko Tahiro Puka Puka initiative, 100 books in Māori, and one of the books is the first Harry Potter novel translated into Te Reo Māori, which is Auckland University Press's greatest seller of all times.
Yeah. It's only been out for not very long.
Yeah, they sold like 20,000 of them, so it's floating everything else, which is great. And Rangatira has been translated by someone who's also Ngāti Wai, and it's coming up very soon, I'm not sure when. But that was a very interesting process, because in real life, Paratene Te Manu could only speak Te Reo Māori. The conceit of the book was that he secretly spoke English and was writing this record down in English, and now it's being translated into Te Reo. So the whole thing has become quite meta. And I was able to share with the translator a letter he wrote in Te Reo, so she could get a notion of his style as well, and usage. Yeah.
Just as an aside, one of the things I loved about that book too was your humour coming through. You gave your sense of humour to your ancestor as well. I thought he was very dry.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of wits or half wits in our family, so I wanted to get a lot of that wit into it. Yes.
Yeah. So about this time, you also started writing young adult novels for an American market primarily. Do you approach writing young adult differently than you do adult fiction.
Yes, and it really annoys me when people say there's no difference. There's a marked difference. Adult readers will put up with all sorts of nonsense. Young readers are much more intolerant. They want story. And they're also really narcissistic, so they don't want old people in there at all. I'm often reading people's manuscripts and they're like, and then the mother figure will be really important. It's like, yeah, no one wants to read about the mother. Okay, they want to read about the teenagers. I got into it because I was already ghostwriting in that area. Some of you know I have made, well, when people say, oh, Paula, it's so long since your last book, I'm like, actually, I've written 5 in that space. Because I ghostwrite so much YA for other people in the States.
And you've got confidentiality clauses, so you can never tell me who they are. And
people always asking me. I'm like, I can't tell you. I sign contracts. And in fact, I just recently did an outline for someone, an old client. So they'll pay you just to come up with the idea for the book. So they'll say, so the premise is, Rachael King lives in Christchurch. Hijinks occur. There's a happy ending. And then I write a 10-page outline and then someone else writes the book. So I just did that recently.
There's a great story in False River where somebody's commissioned to come up with these ideas. And can you just tell us what they come up with?
So there's a story called Premises, and it's about being commissioned to come up with ideas, and all the ideas are just Jane Austen novels with different numbers of sisters and different numbers of suitors, weddings, letters, old houses, and then finally they come up with Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre, and because the company doesn't quite like it. I've had many of those experiences. So writing my own, I thought, well, I know how to do this, and also I've got some books that editors can see to show that I've written them. So I wrote 4, 2 set in New Orleans, 1 in New York, where I went to university, which is allegedly the most haunted city in Europe, and 1 in Rome. So they're all supernatural mysteries, and they were very enjoyable to write, and hard to write.
And sold incredibly well.
Yeah, the first one, Ruin, sold over 300,000. It did really well. But you only have so much energy in your life and so much time.
Yeah. As well, I know. I can relate to that. So you had the Forbidden Cities short stories as well, but you've also contributed to, edited or co-edited many collections, including last year's A Clear Dawn, New Asian Writing. Why do you think, or how important do you think these kinds of anthologies are so Ko Aotearoa Tātou was the other one, or why do you think these are important, these anthologies?
Anthologies are a really good way of bringing together established and emerging writers often. So I'm working on one at the moment of contemporary short Māori fiction, which brings together established emerging writers. The one you mentioned, A Clear Dawn, was fully about emerging writers. It was the first ever anthology of Asian writing, Asian fiction, poetry and nonfiction in New Zealand, which is crazy given the amount of talent we have. And they're a good way of people sampling a whole lot of writers. It also provides opportunities for writers who other editors and publishers and agents and festival directors will come across while looking in an anthology rather than waiting for a whole book.
It was beautifully produced as well. That actually they both were. Canterbury University Press published.
Otago.
Otago. Yes, Otago. Ko
Otago.
Aotearoa Tātou, and Auckland University Press with the Clear Dawn.
Alison Wong and I edited A Clear Dawn, and we're very proud of it. There's 75 writers in it. It was a huge amount of work. It was way too much work, and we had a weekly Zoom. Alison's in Australia, and I'm in Auckland. We had a weekly Friday afternoon Zoom where we would go through things, whether it was editing pieces, going through our introduction. It was a very intense relationship. And then a year ago, we toured the South Island. Went to Arrowtown, Wanaka, Dunedin, Invercargill, because the Asian New Zealand Foundation said, if you go to Southland, we'll give you money. We're like, we are there.
And they came to Word as well in Christchurch.
That's right. And I was supposed to come to that, but as usual, Auckland was in lockdown. That was really great, except my husband got tired of Alison and me in the car talking nonstop. But aside from that, it was great.
And your story, False River, was shortlisted for the Sunday Times Award?
Yeah, so in the UK, they have a very lucrative £30,000 short story award. And so my story, False River, that is the title track of that collection, set in New Orleans after the storm, because everything in New Orleans is before or after the
Yeah,
storm. That was shortlisted, and that's judged blind. So they said the judges got a real shock because they thought that I was an American man. Because it's a male point of view character and it's from New Orleans, and they were really shocked that I was a woman from New Zealand.
Yeah.
I think they were slightly annoyed because women were dominating. In fact, I think we were all women that year,
Wow.
possibly. But
Wow.
they had been convinced that I was an older man from America. So that's my other
They thought they were
persona.
being diverse by having you in there. So can we just talk about craft for a minute? So you recently said, I sneakily listened to a talk that you gave recently at the Auckland Art Gallery. And you recently said in that talk that ideas are the enemy of the creative writer, particularly the apprentice writer. Can you expand on the idea of why you think ideas don't make stories?
Yeah, and also I recorded a TEDx talk this week about this similar
right.
thing, actually, because I was coerced into doing this for a school, and it was yesterday, so I couldn't do it in person, so I had to record it. And it was about how imagination is really important, no matter what your endeavour you are in life. If you work in science or in business, whatever you're doing, the imagination, imagining what could possibly be, imagining what's not there. And sport as well, and talked about Edmund Hillary and Tenzing Norgay climbing Everest. You have to imagine it's possible in order to do it. Much more compelling than ideas. I think people get really bogged down with ideas, with inspiration, with the light bulb moment, which we all wish happened to us every 5 minutes. But in fact, often imagination and collaboration are much more important parts of the process. And I was talking to a lady here who teaches young people, or librarian, overseeing the work of young people, and they often get very bound up in the idea. So their idea is, suddenly there's a lockdown here, zombies are at the door, we all have to hunker down. That's the idea. But there's no story yet because there are no characters. And the characters in the story are the much more important thing. So my teacher at Iowa, the late Frank Conroy, said, ideas are great, but they'll only get you so far. Yeah. And I think often we put too much emphasis on creativity and ideas rather than on imagination and dreaming.
And craft as well.
Well,
I mean,
yeah, obviously.
I kind of get the sense with a lot of your work that you build a story from. I mean, that's the kind of what I got from that talk was that you don't say, oh, I'm going to have this idea and I'm going to write it, but more you build it from the ground up.
I talk about that quite a lot with student writers, that often you're just gathering things along the way. I talked about this with Ian Weddy briefly yesterday, though I think it was after the session rather than during it. I said to him, for me, going to this Anselm Kiefer exhibition at the Royal Academy in London in 2014 led to stories like The Three Princesses. It led to the story in some way, The Third Snow, not directly and literally, but seeing Anselm Kiefer's work about European forests maybe unlock something or turn something in my mind. So then I'm thinking about the forest, the fairy tale, the European darkness, and how I can play around with it. And often it's that's one of the elements, but it might be something else. In the case of The Three Princesses, it was us staying in a hotel in Estonia and seeing a particular print they had on the wall of a famous painting of three women, Grand or Archduchesses of Saxony, with these very elaborate blonde plaited hairdos. So it all kind of goes into the tumble dryer of your brain. And then eventually certain things coalesce together. So it's not about one idea, it's about many different experiences and thoughts and
Connections.
Yeah, connections.
I love what Michael Chabon says about each of his books starts with a yearning.
Well, that's the whole Robert Olin Butler thing as well. So Robert Olin Butler, the American writer, and a nut, I'll say that on record, has a book called From Where You Dream about the writing process. And he says art does not come from ideas, it comes from the white hot centre of you. So it's what are you passionate about? What are you really interested in? What drives you? But the yearning is a big thing with him. So he won't let students in his MFA course at Tallahassee, I think, workshop unless on the front page he can detect the yearning. And I met some of these students once. They said, we've been in the course for over a year. We still haven't been able to workshop anything. There's insufficient yearning. And I thought, this is a good ruse. I should be saying this to my students. Insufficient yearning. Come back later. But I do see what he's saying. It's like, where is the passion here? Where is the conflict? Where is the desire? That's what he wants to see in there.
Yeah. I mean, I often think of yearning too as just being, you have this thing that's just there, and you're sort of straining towards it, but you don't quite know what it is, and that's what you're kind of working out on the page as well.
No, absolutely. Yeah, you don't think it all and then just write it down. It's the process of writing where things arise and come to the table.
And you said in that talk that you tell your students to stop thinking so much.
Oh, I'm always shouting at people to stop thinking. I set a little exercise, so I'll say, just write down everything you associate with autumn. Everything, good and bad. And some of them are sitting there. I say, stop thinking, just write anything. It doesn't have to be right, just write anything down, because they're overthinking. And that's when they get themselves into places where they can't write, because they're too busy thinking and not actually just writing. And it's a lack of bravery, I think, because as we know, in all artistic endeavours, and in scientific ones as well, and in business ones, there is trial and error. You try something, see if it works. Try something else, see if it works. You can't wait till the perfect thing happens.
And what about the role of the subconscious? Because Norman Mailer said something interesting. I think he called it the unconscious. You have to pamper it like a racehorse in order for it to do its work.
Well, my unconscious is so out of control. Sometimes I'll tell my husband a dream I've had. He says, please seek professional help. Because it's really... But I do think writing is your...
Sorry, I'm just thinking about the dream you were telling us about this morning. We're all staying in a house. Sue was there in Christchurch, and we were kind of sharing dreams this morning, but I won't get you to share yours. Sorry.
I've already forgotten it, actually. My unconscious has moved on. I mean, if you think when you're in the zone of creating any sort of work of art, it is your conscious and your unconscious mind working together. And you do need the craft, the ability, the technique, as you were saying. You need to be able to apply it, but you also need to really be in a zone of creation that draws on your unconscious. Yeah. And it's kind of like, I think, what we do when we play when we're children. You must all remember playing as children. And remember how what's real and what isn't real blurs, and time speeds by, and until you're called for dinner or called for bed or something, but you're in the zone. Now we have to make the dinner. Yeah, exactly. You call yourself, though sometimes, I mean, if I'm working, I don't want any disruptions, just want to keep going. Yeah. And I think often we lose that as we get older. I did have one friend, by the way, who said she never played as a child, that they didn't have toys of any kind. But she's a very strange friend. You don't need toys to play. No, I know. So just for the sake of the podcast, an audience member is pointing out it could be a mental health issue, which in the case of my friend, I think is absolutely true. But that freedom of playing, that freedom and excitement and the fluidity, and you know how in play you often come back to the same things again, but with variations. I feel that's the joy of writing. And I'm just thinking about dialogue too, because in False River again, you've got this wonderful story called, well, it's not a story, an essay called Women Still Talking, which is quite an affectionate portrait of your mother's flaws. But it also reveals some of the secrets of your craft, because you talk about eavesdropping on people. Can you just tell us about that? I'm a terrible eavesdropper, and I, for that story, Women Still Talking, which was partly about my mother, who I miss very much, but she would talk nonstop for hours and hours, and she would link her stories, disparate stories, together by saying, however, or, and that passed off, and then there would be some other story entirely. And it was quite artful, actually. But I'd still tend to have notebooks, so if I'm sitting at a cafe, or in this case on a train for that story, I was sitting on a train across from women in a group, and then another woman who they didn't know sat with them, and then they all talked. And I just took a lot of notes. It was really fantastic. It was a really fantastic conversation, but I'm a big believer in eavesdropping and stealing generally. But how do you turn those eavesdrop conversations into fiction that is something interesting that people want to read? So, for example, in Hibiscus Coast, I wasn't planning on eavesdropping, but I went somewhere for dinner, and obviously I was by myself. They thought I was a restaurant reviewer because I was writing in my notebooks. They kept bringing me all these things I hadn't ordered. It was brilliant. But I could not help notice around me that there were tables of men, most of whom were white and of a certain age, and with them was a young woman, a local, and sort of business dinners. But near me there was a young woman who was Chinese and a white man. And at one point I heard her say something like, I mean, it's in the book, I just put it in the book. She said, well, what if I was to come to the door? What would your wife say? And I thought I was going to fall off my chair trying to eavesdrop on that conversation, because I'm like, this would work really well in my novel. So could you speak up? Because I would really like this in my novel. I just didn't. And so I took what I could from that, because it really worked with the story, because Emma, my main character, who is a Chinese New Zealander in Shanghai, where her dead mother was from, gets caught up in a very unhealthy relationship with an expatriate white New Zealander. So it was very useful to me. So yeah, that's how I work it in.
And what was the answer? What would the wife say if she came to the...
I couldn't hear. But the guy was, I think, doing a lot of like, but yeah.
Yeah. Going back to False River, which is a fantastic book, by the way, and everyone should buy it. It's a really unusual book, which has actually caused problems for you, I know, because it's part fiction and part non-fiction. You couldn't enter it into the Ockham Book Awards. It would have defied categorisation. So it's fiction and it's essays, but you've also got biography in there as well. Robert Johnson and
Billy the Kid.
And also one of my favourite things in the book is your Laura Ingalls Wilder, Little House on the Prairie, where you tell us what she meant to you as a child and then what the result of your research was.
Who here has read Laura Ingalls Wilder?
Oh, look.
Those of you who haven't really have wasted your lives, but you probably haven't seen The Godfather either. I absolutely loved her books as a child, and when I stopped working in the record business, I went on a big odyssey in the US to all the places where she'd lived. So from South Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Kansas, Missouri, and then I even went to upstate New York where her husband Almanzo grew up. Went to all those places, went to the various hideous pageants they have every year, where they reenact things from the book that are really reenacted from the TV series. And yeah, it's very weird. And also did a lot of research. I spent quite a lot of time as a Hoover scholar at the Hoover Institute in West Branch, Iowa, where all Rose Wilder Lane's papers were left, and also at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri, where quite a lot of stuff was left as well. And I thought I would write a book, but I just got so disenchanted with it, I didn't. And then I was talking earlier with Claudia. There's a very good book that was written a few years ago called Prairie Fires, a fantastic book about Laura Ingalls Wilder, and that would have been the book I would have wanted to write. So I'm glad someone else who was a lot more hardworking than me got it written. But I still wrote this long essay called Rocky Ridge for...
It's about 10,000 words, I think.
It's super long, yeah.
It's the longest thing in the book. One thing I'm really impressed by with you is, you don't just have an idea for something and do a bit of Googling for research. You actually go to the places. How important is it for you to actually get amongst all those archives and visit those places?
I love going to places. I mean, I'm sure a lot of you miss travel. I'm so bad at travel now. I only bought like 3 items of clothing with me for this whole week. I've forgotten how to travel. I've forgotten everything. But I really like walking in footsteps and trying to imagine. So when I was writing Rangatira, I went up to Nungaru, and a woman who's a cousin of mine took us in a dinghy somewhere where the old power site was, so we could just climb over. I mean, there's nothing left, but just to climb around there and think about what could be seen and what could be smelled, and just to have that experience. Now, going to London and Birmingham was obviously quite different because so much of what my character and the Māori he travelled with experienced in 1863 has gone. And particularly in Birmingham, well, I thought it was the Luftwaffe's fault, but it wasn't. It was the town planners of the 60s. Just all these things gone. And also you can never travel back in time. Obviously, London and Birmingham those days was filthy. The black skies, coal smoke, fog. And so just having to imagine it. But luckily I was writing that book in Glasgow, living in a tenement apartment built in the 19th century, which was also freezing, so that was quite helpful. But I did get to go to one place that they had been, and that was Marlborough House, which is now the head of the Commonwealth. And it's where the Māori party were entertained by or met the then Prince and Princess of Wales, so the future Edward VII and Queen Alexandra. So I infiltrated it and got to see the big salon with these incredible painted murals of the Duke of Marlborough's exploits, which of course include the Battle of Blenheim, after which your town is named. So you'll know all this anyway, Marlborough Blenheim. It all makes sense to you. But being there was really incredible, because I looked up and I thought, well, firstly, Paratene Te Manu would see these are the Duke of Marlborough's taua, right, his war expeditions, just like Paratene had been on in the 1820s with Hongi Hika. Here they were all commemorated. And then in one corner, something you can see that I had not known existed because it's not on the website. And in fact, I don't even think it's in the brochure that you can get, is a black face, a young black man who was either the Duke's favourite steward or slave or /slave. But I thought, I bet you that the Māori party would have noticed that dark face staring down at them, the only dark face in the whole place. I'm sure that they would have noticed it, so I was able to write it into the book. That was something I only knew about because I was there.
You went there.
And to think them seeing it. So I like that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I mean, you write these kind of mini biographies of people. You were also very interested in Jean Rhys for
I'm still.
And you're still working on that?
So I'm trying. Kirsten was talking about writing a play. I'd like to write a play, but I really don't know how. So I've just been thinking about it for about 5 years. But there was a summer that Jean Rhys spent in the south of France, and Tom and I have actually been to the house, which has really high gates. We were climbing the gates and hanging off them and peering over, which is something I did in Rome once. Have you seen the film Roman Holiday? You know, where Gregory Peck's character is living? And it's still there, but it's got gates. So I have lain on the ground trying to see under the gates and just hoping someone will come and say, would you like to go in? But no one has said that yet. But with Jean Rhys, she spent the summer as a ghostwriter. This is all absolutely true. In the south of France, this mansion in Juan-les-Pins, and before she was Jean Rhys, when she was still Ella Longley, and the woman she was writing for, this very rich American, was the mother-in-law of Rudolph Valentino. And just everything about it is crazy. This woman believed that if you'd had a past life as an Egyptian, probably Cleopatra, right, then you should decorate your house in an Egyptian style. And so Jean Rhys was trying to write this book with her. So I've done a huge amount of work on it. I've even been to the archives in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah, we've been to Juan-les-Pins. I've spent a lot of time at the British Library because Jean Rhys was a chorus girl for a while. So I found a recording of the star of the show she was in, and with the chorus singing in it, and listened to it. And
amazing.
I love all that stuff, but eventually I will do it. I'm just not sure when.
Yeah, great. And then, of course, another writer you were interested in was Robin Hyde. So Shining Land, for sale out in the foyer. It's a beautiful book. It's a collaboration with the photographer Haru Samashima. And did anyone come to Paula's lecture the other day? Which was absolutely fascinating. So I won't dwell on it too much because you did a whole hour on it, but it's a gorgeous book. But what I'm interested in, what you didn't touch on your lecture, was you say of Robin Hyde that she was, quote, vivid and roaring all the time, wanting too much, too wild inside. I try to douse my own wildfires. And I just want to know why you try and douse your own wildfires, but also how did you identify with her and what parallels did you see in
Rachel asked me yesterday, I think you asked me, you said, will you work at the University of Auckland until you retire? Which instantly made me want to kill myself, but anyway. And I said to her, no, at some point I will be walked off the premises, escorted by a security guard holding a box of my possessions. And I think that's probably how I will leave the university, because really at some point the complaints are going to rack up. But yeah, because I can't always control the fire inside. And
you called yourself a difficult woman.
I am a difficult woman.
And you said you're secretive.
I'm really secretive.
Can you tell me some secrets
Everything
later?
I've said is untrue today.
You say I work too hard and achieve too little. I mean, it's really interesting for me to find these insights into you, who I've known for so long, in this thing about Robin Hyde. You know, you just kind of sneak them in there, almost so that people won't notice, but you've kind of...
Well, you guys know I work too hard. I mean, I've had 4 sessions here before this. So people ask me, have I had a nice time here? The answer is no. Because I've been living on my nerves the whole time, you know. And just, it's too, I mean, tonight I have to write a reference for someone, tomorrow I have to be interviewed, then I have to give an hour-long webinar for someone else. It's just constant. And sometimes I think I'm going to crack. In fact, I think I threatened it last week. I said, I'm going to crack. But I didn't crack.
Yeah.
Onwards.
Anyway, it's a wonderful book. One of my favourite genres, I think, is literary essays that also investigate the personal as well, and that, you know, that perfectly fits there. As do, you know, I could go on forever about False River, because there's a gorgeous one about heroines who are sick in books that you read, but also drawing parallels with your own life and your father's illness.
That's called Sick Notes, that essay, which is hard for me to read now, but because I read so much growing up, like what Katie did, Heidi, the Chalet School books, where the heroines were sickly, and I just really aspired to be carted around in a bath chair, being attended to. Unfortunately, they tended to just have a lot of fresh air and then recover. Remember, they were all sort of, it's like, oh, look, Clara can walk after all. I'm like, I'd stick in the bath chair if I were you. I'd be Elizabeth Barrett Browning, languishing for years and then getting married and going off to Italy. There's nothing wrong with her, you know, but all those years. And I could see why, because...
Well, you can have a rest when you're sick, can't you?
I know. I kept hoping I'd get COVID you know, just to have a rest, but no.
So Paula is the hardest working woman of in the New Zealand literature scene, I have to say. And the thing is, you do so much for so many people, and I think people don't realise as well just quite how much you do for us, for everybody. There's just a few of your projects that I'd just like to quickly talk about, and then we'll have some questions. But the first is the Academy of New Zealand Literature. Can you just tell us a little bit about that quickly?
So you should all go to the website, anzliterature.com, for latest on contemporary New Zealand writers, mid-career and senior writers. So we have features, we have fantastic interviews, including a great one with Pat Grace that Adam Dudding did a few years back. And we've been running reviews as well since lockdown, though I don't know how much longer we'll do that. And then in the backroom work is we do things like ebooks about our writers that go to festival directors around the world to try to get New Zealanders more opportunities. And we've just done an ebook where New Zealand writers writing about Japan. We have it in English and also in Japanese. I'm going to be in Japan in October, and I'm going to take some printed copies with me, but also it's an e-blast that can go to all teachers of Japanese here in New Zealand, and also to anyone interested in New Zealand literature in Japan. Yeah.
And you do a lot of this stuff in your own time. You don't get paid for it. You were on the board of the Māori Literature Trust for a while, and now
5 years.
Yeah, and now you've set up this really fantastic website, the Māori Literature Hub. Can you just briefly tell us what it is? But also, I'd love to hear about what you think about what it's like to be a Māori writer in 2022.
Okay, so Wharerangi which is a type of storehouse and a platform. So it's maorilithub.co.nz. And it was because I was teaching at the National Māori Writers Hui, and I found out that nobody knew anywhere to send their work, and nobody read anything. So people had no idea of landfall, say. I'd say, well, you could send this to landfall. Well, I don't know how. So I wanted to have a site where a Māori writer, aspiring writer, and to be honest, many non-Māori writers could go and say, who's publishing what, and who have they published recently, and how do I get in touch with them? And also opportunities for residencies, competitions, awards, and so on. But to be a Māori writer now, well, it's both an exciting time and it's very frustrating. I was moaning to Rachel earlier that for those of us who are Gen X, so if you think the novelists, Māori novelists of the Gen X generation, me, James George, Kaliana Murray, Alice Tawhai, who's now written a novel, a bit younger than us, but Tina Makareti, we get quite overlooked in things. And in fact, there was the Kupu first Māori Writers Festival in Rotorua, And I rang them to say, could I do something in this? And they said, oh, yes, you can come down and teach 2 school classes, which I did, and then be on your way. Didn't want me for anything else at all. And you often feel like younger writers coming up have not read your work or know anything about it. So often people...
Whereas they might have read Patricia Grace.
Yeah, they've read Patricia and Whitty, but then they'll say, oh, all the old style work is very rural and Marae-centric. It's like, well, you need to read Queen of Beauty or Hibiscus Coast or any of my stories. And, remember when Carrie Hume, I don't know if you remember this, she was nominated for something called the Pegasus Award for Māori writers back in the 80s, and C.K. Stead came out guns blazing to say, well, you're not really, she's writing a novel, that's not a Māori form. And he was charming on the subject. Mm-hmm. Nowadays, we have a new generation who are saying the same thing. Are you writing a novel that's not really a Māori form? So we have the same kind of reactionary comments and impulses, but now directed from a younger generation who are very hot on what is and what isn't matauranga Māori. And obviously we persevere, but I think it's a strange time in that way. It is a strange time for us.
I think sometimes, you're not afraid to speak your mind, and sometimes you inadvertently cause controversy.
And sometimes on purpose as well. Yeah.
Do you think sometimes the work you do is misunderstood?
Yeah, it's funny. Both Rachel and I are now referred to as, institutional figures, gatekeepers. It's quite funny because we're just silly girls really still. Yeah. But I often think when people talk about gatekeeping, it is a very important role, because the gatekeeping is not just keeping people out, it's opening the gates and shepherding people through. Like there must be gates open to let all those sheep around the vines, the vineyards.
The runs, right.
What are they doing in there, those sheep? Nibbling away. But it is something you take really seriously, and I think some people think if you're a gatekeeper, you're just a bad person, rather than you're someone who's spending quite a lot of your time trying to open gates and trying to open doors and trying to open windows and encourage people. There is some bad gatekeeping that goes on here. There was a recent anthology, which I won't name, but that had no Asian writers in it, no Pacific writers, only 2 Māori writers, and one of them was Whitty Ihimira. No Auckland writers, except for Whitty. And it's like, I think when you are in that position of gatekeeping, it's incumbent on you to really do the work and to realize that you don't know a lot and that you have to ask. You have to ask for help. You have to collaborate. You have to reach out. But I think people think you have more power than you have. They think you have more money than you have. And they don't realize how much is done for free, often by women actually, and often by women of a certain age. That's why I'm leaving the New Zealand Book Awards Trust after 5 years. I just left the Māori Literature Trust after 5 years. Those are 5 years of hundreds and hundreds of hours of unpaid work. And at some point, you really want to step away to let someone else do it.
Yeah. It's interesting, in your book, Shining Land, Frank Sargison called Robin Hyde a trying old thing when she was Iris Wilkinson, and a silly bitch when she was Robin Hyde as well. So,
yeah, the boys' club were not always very helpful to Robin Hyde. But all literature scenes are petty and nasty. All literature scenes everywhere. Probably all art circles are.
Keeps life interesting.
It does. Kirsten said something funny when we talked about Pat Grace last night, and I said, having all those children and jobs and writing. And Kirsten said, when did she have time to be having arguments on Facebook and having Twitter feuds? It's like, exactly, yeah. Pat did not make time in her life for those things. I mean, obviously they didn't exist, but it's easy to get drawn into this kind of thing, and it is just a waste of time.
Except that the generation before us just wrote letters to the listener backwards and forwards. It was the same as a Twitter.
That's true.
Twitter spat, but it would just be a lot slower.
And longer.
Yeah. Do we have any questions in the audience?
Everyone's terrified I'll be mean to them.
No questions? Right, well, while you're thinking about your riveting question that you're going to ask, if an alien came down to New Zealand right now and looked at the New Zealand literature scene, and I'm not just talking about the Twitter spats, but how would you describe it to them? What would they find?
I think we have many new and interesting voices emerging. We have many smaller presses, independent presses, and independent initiatives bringing a wider variety of books. If I'm thinking about fiction here and poetry in particular, we've always had strong non-fiction publishing. So, I mean, if you think for the Auckland New Zealand Book Awards, maybe in total 180 books were submitted last year. And that's just books for adults. And that's just books that the publishers think have a chance at the Auckland New Zealand Book Awards. So a lot of really wonderful publishing will not be included in that. And if you look at the shortlist or even the long list this year, a wide range of publishers from very tiny operations to multinationals. So I would say this is a time of growth and change and transition. I know that publishers are still desperate for a wider diversity of voices and are very keen to nurture new talent, and not just young talent, because you're never too old to write a book. You might be too young to write one, but you're never too old. So new talent can emerge at any age, and so that's good. I would say there's still not enough opportunities for fiction writers here. If you live in Australia, you would have a zillion% chance more of getting your book published. And
awards, lots of awards.
Lots of awards.
Well.
I was reminded of this because I judged an Australian historical novel competition 2 years ago, massive amounts of money involved. And for that, actually, there were about 180 books. So maybe I'm just making up this 180 figure. It's just in my head. It was open to New Zealand writers as well. I think there were 5 New Zealand books and the rest were Australian. And they were all books that had been published in the previous year. Many with good presses. I mean, some of them were nonsense, but there was a solid chunk of historical novels, like maybe 80, that had been published with good publishers, well written, well presented. It's a bigger market, but I think we are still very much at the mercy of our small market here.
I think we could probably count 5 New Zealand novels that would be eligible for that this year. Do we have any questions yet? Don't be shy. No. Oh yes, here we go. There's one here.
Is it in the middle there?
Just wait for the microphone.
If you want to hear my Shining Land talk, it was recorded as well, and there's visuals with it too.
Kia ora, Paula. Thank you. Why do you ghostwrite?
Oh, for money.
Do we have another question?
That's the only reason. There's another question just here.
Paula, I quite enjoy the Gen X as being the forgotten generation, actually, because all the arguments are about the millennials versus the boomers.
I know, but boomers versus millennials. I'm like, what about us?
It's just so weird, because actually, we're quite important.
We're just laid back.
No, though I have to think some of my Gen X peers are the parents of my students, and I feel that they should have done a little bit more with the whole general knowledge thing. But I don't like to criticize my generation too much. But really, if you're parents of children, please tell them some stuff. I said once to a class of undergraduates, I said, it's like that old debate, who's worse, Mao or Stalin? And a lot of people had no idea who Mao or Stalin were, and these are second-year university students. I blame the parents.
Do we have any more questions? Yes?
Luke Elworthy, my landlord.
Thanks very much, you guys. That was fantastic. Paula, just your thoughts about what you said about Australia and the well-resourced literary prizes and things. I mean, bigger, wealthier country, but do you think that has anything to do with the relative difference in the importance of public giving and philanthropies, particularly for the arts in this country?
I do think so. I think Auckland is swarming with people who've got a lot of money. I see them at the hairdressers. I see their cars. I know people got lots of money, and they're still quite tight about giving it or sharing it. And it doesn't seem to affect visual art the same way it affects us in literature, perhaps because then they don't have something to show for it. Though I would be happy for them to hang my book on the wall, and I could do a special framed edition for them if they wanted, if that would help at all. In fact, that might be an idea for all of us.
Don't they?
So, because, someone might buy one less painting a year, but be able to sponsor a book award for decades. We still don't have a sponsor for our general non-fiction award at the Auckland New Zealand Book Awards. Now, if you think nonfiction publishing is excellent in this country, really, from the essays and memoirs to histories to, books like Dave Lowe's on climate change, which won Best First Book in that category this year. Vincent O'Malley won Best Book. Pat Grace's memoir was a finalist. Really great books, but where is the person who will step forward? We're not talking a lot of money here, relatively speaking.
If there's anybody here who has a spare $15,000 a year.
Or really 20, okay.
Oh, sorry, 20.
A lot of expenses. But, that's why we have so much money for the Fiction Prize, because one woman, Jan Medlicott, through the Acorn Trust in Tauranga, donated in perpetuity. She put her money down because she loves to read. She loves fiction. She loves New Zealand books. And it feels to me like there should be more than one or two people like that. So the question is saying that, should we feel sorry for rich people, I think, to summarise. It's interesting because recently the Academy didn't get the funding it was hoping to get. And so one of my friends said, oh, don't worry, I know loads of rich people. I play golf with them. I'll just ask them. And she got back to me, she said, this is much harder than I thought. She said, apparently no one is interested in books and writers. I'm like, But what I found was that a lot of them would give $5,000, and I realised $5,000 for a very rich person is like $20 for me. It's like if someone really wants money, I give them $20, and I feel generous, but it won't really hurt me. So I think for them, I got in a lot of $5,000 from people. Oh, that's fine. I can make it last. But I think maybe our literature still suffers as well from some element of the cultural cringe in some circles. We're not seen as glamorous as anything international.
Look how glamorous this is. This is why we're so grateful to the sponsors of this festival.
Absolutely. I mean, we can't really thank sponsors enough, because once they're really willing to support our literary culture, especially by giving wine, which I feel is an ideal sponsorship, it's really, really important, because otherwise these conversations couldn't take place. And otherwise writers would be even more bitter and dishevelled than they already are.
I'm going to pull you back to the YA, because it's close to my heart. If we go back about 5 years, there was a really, really strong YA presence of writing in New Zealand, and I think that's sort of dropped in the last 5 years. We've still got writing that's maybe for the year 7 to 10 group, but
junior fiction.
They've forgotten about the YA for where that reading falls off.
But I should say to you, it's not that they've forgotten about it; it doesn't sell well enough here. Don't forget, we're competing with here. Any author is competing with everyone else writing in the English language, and the big series that come out of this, particularly celebrity authors out of the UK and the US, they're selling, but YA doesn't sell enough for publishers to want to take a risk on it, local YA.
Okay. So
everything always comes back to what do people buy, and I say this about short stories all the time. At any given point in New Zealand, there is a short story competition going on. You're probably all entering one as we speak, right? Secretly on your phones. And yet short story collections don't sell very well, and neither do short story anthologies. And I think they should make it a requirement of entry to any competition that someone has to show a receipt for a short story collection they've actually bought, because we all want to write them, but we don't want to actually read or buy them. And if we want there to be more short stories published, then we need, as consumers, to go out and buy them or get them out the library, which also helps. If there's a big demand at a library, though obviously as authors we always prefer that hard $2 coming through our royalty statements. But what can we do to support this? If we want more local YA, then we absolutely need to encourage our young people to read it, which means buying it for them as Christmas presents and seeking it out and asking for it at bookshops. And so that message goes back through sales reps.
Can I just soapbox for a moment as well?
Yes.
In Australia, they actually have a quota with schools about a percentage of books that they have to buy that are Australian books. New Zealand has nothing like that. School libraries don't get a separate ring-fenced funding. It has to come out of their general funding. So there are actually ways that the government could help New Zealand writers write YA and actually for it to sell, but it's not happening. Now, It's actually 5 past, so we're going to have to wrap that up.
Okay.
But yes, thank you. I told you we could easily talk for 2 hours, and instead we talked for 1 hour and
I'm
5
my mother's
minutes.
daughter, after all.
It's been really great. Paula, you've had such a amazing career and life so far, and I know that, we've got many more books in the future. There's a new novel, apparently, she's been working on that I'm really excited for. Thank you for everything that you do for us and for all writers and readers in New Zealand. I really, really appreciate it, and I'm sure everybody here does as well.
Kia ora, Rachel.
And Paula will be signing her books out in the foyer afterwards, so please buy them, and if they're not on the table, then seek them out elsewhere. Thank you, Paula.
Kia ora, Rachel. Thank you. Thanks very much.